and welcome to Doctors In. I'm Angel and today I have with me an endoscopic surgeon and otologist. So let's welcome Dr. Rajesh Raju George.
Okay, let me begin like this. So if I want to talk about hearing loss as such, the basic things that you should understand is the ear is divided into the external ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. And all these parts can have causes which can lead on to hearing loss.
Oh, okay.
Okay? The external ear is that part of the pinna. We call this a pinna, this external ear, till the eardrum is called the external ear. In the external ear, if you have wax or any other debris collecting in the external auditory canal, then that can cause itself a hearing loss. Then comes the middle ear. Middle ear starts with the eardrum, and the middle ear has three small ossicles. We call that ossicles. It's called malleus, incus, and stapes. So once sound comes through your external auditory canal, it hits the tympanic membrane, or the eardrum as we call it. Then it vibrates, and then the three ossicles inside vibrate, the malleus, incus, and stapes. Once that vibrates, then the sound is transmitted into the inner ear, where the major organ of hearing is called the cochlea. And cochlea has got hair cells, which are the basic organs of hearing. Once that gets stimulated, then there is a nerve which carries the sound signals into the auditory cortex of the brain, and that is how you hear. So you can have issues anywhere in these areas, and that can cause hearing loss.
What sort of people need cochlear implants?
Let me tell you like this. Every child who is born, I can say the statistics is around 1 in 4,000 children who are born have a hearing loss at varying degrees.
Okay.
It can be a mild hearing loss, or it can be a moderate hearing loss. It can be severe to profound hearing loss. Okay. And now we are talking about those children who are born with hearing loss are those with whose hair cells inside the cochlea are damaged.
Okay.
Right. So those type of hearing loss are called sensory neural hearing loss. Okay. Now, cochlear implant is a surgery that is done for children who are born with profound deafness with the hair cells damaged completely. Okay.
Is it some external device which you implant or just a corrective surgery that you...
If you're going directly to the implant has got two parts, an external part and an internal part that is surgically implanted.
Okay, so it goes like that. So this is something which affects mostly children, or is it applicable to all age groups, or suddenly it might come from middle age and it might grow up to...
As I said first, the cochlear implant is set apart for those people who have profound hearing loss, who do not benefit with the hearing aids, right?
Okay.
So that means if the hearing loss is moderate, then if they are fitted on with the hearing aids that can actually gain their hearing, then we don't suggest a cochlear implant at all. And it is not for one-sided hearing loss also. So when you have bilateral hearing loss in both ears, then if the hearing aid also does not benefit them, then those are candidates for cochlear implant. So it can happen in the, just as I said, when a child is born deaf, then that once you identify that the child has deafness with the various investigation modalities that we have, even on the first day of life, you can identify if the child has normal hearing or not. Okay. There are certain investigations called autoacoustic emissions, which you can do on the first day of life. Okay. So if you have a suspicion of hearing loss, then these children are followed up. And by 3 months of age, usually you can do a test called the brainstem evoked response audiometry, which actually tells you whether the child hears or not. Okay. And the point is to pick up these children at the earliest. Okay. Because the delay can cause issues. For example, if I tell you that if you don't use a muscle for some time, the muscle get atrophied, right? It just shrinks off, right? So just like that, if a child does not hear for quite a long time, all these connections to the brain are not working, right?
Okay, so as you prolong this, it becomes more and more difficult to actually
Exactly.
have any chance of hearing.
Right, exactly. So if a child is identified to have a hearing loss at the age of 7 or 8, that happens sometimes. But at that point of time, probably an implant even might not work in that child as compared to a child who would have been identified at a very early age.
What sort of risks would be involved in this surgery?
Risks are there for any surgeries, right?
Yeah.
The major risk for this, as any surgery, this is done usually in a child.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the anesthesia complications itself is an important category as such.
Okay.
And then as a surgery as such, we are implanting this cochlear implant first as an area on the bone behind your ears that is called the mastoid bone. That is drilled and a part of the implant is kept there. And now from that part there is a small electrode which you actually put right into the round window, it is called, that is into the inner ear, where fluid similar to the cerebrospinal fluid is there. So this implantation right into the inner ear actually can cause meningitis if not taken, if we are not taking adequate precautions. Meningitis is an infection of the brain. When you ask the complications, and that is the complication that you must be taking
Is there
care
any
of.
other
Right,
alternative you would, or is this the first thing you would think of? Is this the best surgery, or any other surgical method, or any other method?
As I said, this particular surgery is restricted to those group of people who have profound hearing loss.
Okay. So this is like a
Not
last
responding.
resort.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
So just as I said, there are two types of hearing loss. One is a sensorineural hearing loss, as I said, which is due to the loss of the hair cells inside the cochlea, right? And now the other part of the hearing loss is a conductive hearing loss, where you have any issues in the external auditory canal, the tympanic membrane or the eardrum, or the ear ossicles as such. Now, all these types of hearing loss are called the conductive hearing loss, for which the surgeries are different. And all these conductive hearing loss, we can restore them with different types of surgeries. If there is a hole in the eardrum, it can be repaired with a surgery called tympanoplasty. And if there is a ossicle dislocation or ossicular erosion as secondary to the infection of the middle ear, then that can be corrected. So there are a list of surgeries that you can do for conductive hearing loss, depending on what the pathology is.
How long does this surgery take in general?
We are talking about cochlear implant, are we? Yeah. Okay, cochlear implant, approximately, if you can say, it will last, it will take around 2.5 to 4 hours.
So directly after the surgery, how long would it take, for the healing to start and for the person to be able to hear?
Good question that you asked, because cochlear implant, once it is done, it's not like any other surgery. You do a surgery and the next day onwards, the child is going to hear. It is not the thing. What happens is, first we are allowing the sound signals to reach the brain, right? Yes. So at any point of time, the child is hearing the sound for the first time. Yes. Meaning, it is just sound. It does not have any meaning for him, right?
Okay.
So for the first question that you asked, once the surgery is over, we will wait for the wound to heal before we put on the external part of the cochlear implant. Okay. As I said, it has got an external part. Yeah. Actually, the external part has got a microphone which collects picks up the sound signals, and then it has got a speech processor which transmits the sound signals into the transmitter, and then the transmitter, through the transmitter, it is actually goes into the operated part of the implant. Okay.
Okay.
So we will put the implant, the external part, only after the external incision has healed completely. That will approximately take around 3 weeks of time. So after 3 weeks of time, we fit on the external device, and that is called a switch on. That is what we call them. So once that is done, the first time the child is hearing a sound, that is it. We pass electrical signals and the child responds. Sometimes the child cries, and that is a happy moment. That's the first time, that maybe a time for the parents who will be happy to see the child cry, right? Yeah. So once that happens, then we adjust the sound signals and the intensity of the sound signals in such a way that It's called a programming. This happens throughout his first 4 to 5 years of his cochlear implant, post-cochlear implant life. So after the surgery, after the child's, we know that the child is started to hear. Now there is a part of the rehabilitation process called the auditory verbal therapy. So that is what actually makes the child hear. The surgery is the first part only.
Okay, so there is this therapy to it afterwards.
Exactly. Therapy is the main key part of the success of the cochlear implant surgery. So there are trained professionals for that. There are trained auditory verbal therapists for that. So they take the child in and then they start the therapy from the very beginning, saying A sounds like, everything. An apple is this. And
So the child can get used to
exactly.
all that he missed out also.
Exactly. Yeah, all he missed out. That is the right word.
Okay, so that's why maybe the first sound he hears much becoming like a shock because
Exactly. That is why the child cries, because he is just hearing a sound which absolutely has no meaning. Just like we are taken into some other part of the world and put there and we hear a lot of sounds which does not have any meaning for us, right? Yeah. Just like that, the child is also in a state. Now, he has to be trained for a...
Okay, how long would that take, the training?
If the surgery happens in an early age of life, then the child picks up easily. Okay. Yeah. And by 3 to 4 years, he can even go to the normal school.
This particular surgery is a success always guaranteed for every surgery of this implant that happens.
Okay. Again, that depends on when the child is identified to have the hearing loss and when we do the surgery. As I said, if the child is picked up at a later age, at an age of 8, 9, then he or she may not do as well as a child picked up earlier. One. So that the parents should know. Two, the auditory verbal therapy, post-operative auditory verbal therapy. That is the most important factor, as I said. So he has to be trained in a very good center for him to pick up and be as normal as he can be. Okay. Right. Three is, before surgery, you have to make sure that the cochlea where you are going to put into the electrode does not have any congenital anomaly. Okay? Sometimes the cochlea as such, just like the child has a hearing loss as a congenital anomaly, the cochlea also must have a different anatomy as such. And in such cases, we have to be prepared. And then it may not be successful as in a normal anatomy of cochlea, right? And also after that, this the sound signals has to go through the auditory nerve. We have to make sure that the auditory nerves are intact. Any other congenital anomaly where you don't have a proper normal auditory nerve will also impair the success rate. So these are the things that you actually look into before you actually tell you the success of a surgery. Most commonest cause of hearing loss is not sensorineural hearing loss, it's conductive hearing loss.
Okay, the second part of the...
Yeah, and the most common cause for conductive hearing loss is a condition called chronic otitis media. Chronic otitis media is the infection of the middle ear. Okay, middle ear, I said.
How does that happen, infection? Because it's an internal thing, right?
Right. So that happens. How is the middle ear connected to the external? It is connected through a tube which connects the middle ear into your nose. Yeah. It's called the Eustachian tube, which connects the middle ear into your nose. That is why you feel the pressure changes when you blow your nose and you know that, right?
Yeah.
And so when in childhood, what happens is that there can be recurrent infections of the nose. It can be a sinusitis, it can be recurrent allergies. And most often the children have an organ called adenoids, which are actually situated behind the nose. It's in the nasopharynx, where it is very close to the eustachian tube opening. So when there is adenoid infection, the infection actually ascends through the eustachian tube and go into the middle ear. Okay. So once that happens, there will be fluid collection inside the middle ear, and that gets infected. Once that gets infected, the child is going to have severe pain because there is purulent secretions inside your eardrum. And then finally the eardrum sometimes bursts and you have secretions coming out of the eardrum, okay? So that is how it first happens. Then sometimes this eardrum does not heal at all and there is a small hole on your eardrum.
Okay.
And once the hole does not heal, what happens? Whenever there is an external water coming into the ears or if you have a recurrent nasal infection, again the child is going to have a ear discharge. So that we call as a chronic otitis media. When you have a persistent perforation of the eardrum and you have a middle ear disease. So that is the commonest thing that we see in our outpatient department.
Okay. Is it very common for the eardrums to, burst or?
Yes, it is. It is very common because let me tell you, if I see 20 cases of ear symptoms, then at least 2 patients will have chronic otitis media with a small hole in the eardrum. And these are treated once the eardrum does not heal by itself by 8 to 10 weeks, then the option for these children is only surgery. We do a surgery called tympanoplasty, whereas we close the eardrum and look inside the media where the ossicles are destroyed, because in chronic ear infections, as chronic otitis media, sometimes the ear ossicles will get destructed. Then the destructed ossicle we take out, reconstruct, remodify it, put it again on it, and then reconstruct the eardrum, and then we restore the hearing. Any ENT person would be seeing around 50% of ear cases and 50% of nose cases. I mean, usually the symptoms of nose diseases are nasal discharge, sneezing, nasal block. These are the common symptoms that a patient with a nasal symptoms would come to you to.
Okay.
And depending on the disease, there are a number of diseases for which you need treatment, and some are medical and some are surgical treatment. So allergy is the most common thing. At least 25% of the human population has nasal allergies. That is the statistics. Now, nasal allergies, the commonest symptoms would be sneezing, daytime sneezing, early morning sneezing. They sneeze throughout the day and they have watery nostrils. So once there are no features of fever or infection going on, fever is a typical symptom of an infection, right? So if there is no fever, then you brand as an allergic rhinitis, and then they can be controlled with adequate medical treatment. Okay. But sometimes these can lead on to a sinusitis.
Okay.
Sinuses are those air-filled cavities all around your nose, okay? They have 2 maxillary sinus, frontal sinus, and you have sinuses all around your nose and orbit. And once the infection, if there's an acute infection, sometimes you treat with an antibiotics, it settles. But there is a group of patients where your antibiotics and medical treatment does not work. The patient continues to have nasal discharge, and that is because all these sinuses open into your nose. If these openings into your nose are blocked, all these sinuses open into your nose, if these openings are blocked due to some reason, there will be collection inside the sinuses that will get on infected. So in such cases, if you identify, if there is a specific cause, you identify the cause, take out the cause surgically, open the sinuses, make its drainage into the nose very easy. So that is an endoscopic treatment for sinusitis.
You have an endoscopic approach for the sinusitis. Can the same approach be used for anything else?
Okay, let me tell you like this. For the last 20 years or so, the endoscope has actually revolutionized the treatment in ENT field. These endoscopes are rigid endoscopes which can be passed into behind the nose to see if there is any pathology and then treat them accordingly. But recently, these endoscopes have been used to actually access some tumors in the brain even. You can approach all the sinuses, and through a particular sinus called the sphenoid sinus, you can approach the pituitary gland. And most often, the pituitary tumors are accessed endoscopically now.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And similarly, to the orbit, there are various diseases of the orbit, including there is a particular disease called the chronic dacryocystitis, where you have a swelling in the medial part of your eye, just medial to the eye, and that happens when there is an obstruction to the flow of your tears into the nose.
Okay.
Once that happens, that part can be accessed with the endoscope and opened. This particular sac which is blocked can be actually opened and drained into the nose with the help of the endoscope. Even inside the orbit, the orbital tumors can be accessed with the endoscope, because the orbit and the nose are actually separated by a thin plate of bone called the lamina, which can be actually taken off, and then the inside your orbit can be approached with the endoscopes.
So, to the viewers who are watching this out there, what sort of tips you would give for a general?
In the ears, don't use your earbuds, because earbuds are not good for you. Because people usually put the earbuds to actually clean the ears. But let me tell you, ear is a self-cleansing area. Actually, the all the wax that is produced in the ear, mainly the people use the earbuds to clean the wax. The wax is the normal secretions of your ear canal, and it will be automatically pushed off. So if you put your earbuds, instead of the wax coming out, your earbuds are going to push the wax in. Okay? So don't put the earbuds, because that is always produces harm to the ear.
That just does the opposite of what it claims to do.
Exactly. That is why I would like to put this point first. And whenever you pay for the parents, whenever you suspect any kind of hearing loss for your child, let it be putting a loud volume for the TV. Let it be asking again and again, what is it, ma? What is it, ma? Then if they ask you that, then you have to be careful about that. Ask them. Let the school teachers know also know this. Because any type of small hearing loss has to be picked up and has to be treated at the earliest.
If you listen to music in headphones, it might affect your hearing in long run. Is that true, or?
Well, it's partially true, because if you put the volume at a very high volume, more than 80 decibels, so that may be harmful to your ears. But the normal volume, you can use your headphones, no problems at all.
And is there even a slight possibility that, maybe you're just walking in the street and suddenly someone honks very loudly and then immediately you lose your hearing?
That is true.
It is possible?
Yeah, it is possible. A very high volume of sound very close to your ears can actually make you lose your hearing even.
Just in that instant?
Just in that instance, it can happen.
Okay, so it's not always gradual, or you're born
It may not be. Even there is an entity called sudden sensory neural hearing loss. Okay. One morning, once you wake up, you suddenly understand that you have lost your hearing completely.
What causes that?
There are causes which are not known at all. There are known causes and unknown causes.
Thank you so much for your valuable time. So that was Dr. Rajesh Raju George with us, and until next time, this is Angel signing off.
Thank you.